Some chairs hold more than just bodies. They hold confessions, lies, and the weight of sins that men carry to their graves. Tonight, I'm taking you to Millbrook, Pennsylvania, where one barber's chair became the most dangerous seat in town. Picture this. It's October 1961, and every Saturday morning for 32 years, the men of Millbrook have sat in Frank Castellano's barber chair, trusting him with their necks and, more dangerously, with their secrets. But when Frank is found dead on a Monday morning, slumped in his own chair with his throat cut by his own razor, Sheriff Tom Bradley realizes that someone in this quiet Pennsylvania town has been keeping secrets worth killing for. The investigation will reveal that Frank Castellano wasn't just cutting hair for 3 decades. He was collecting confessions, recording betrayals, and documenting enough sins to destroy half the town's most respected families. But which secret was dangerous enough to turn a trusted confidant into a corpse? And who decided that silence was worth more than Frank's life?
Welcome back to Golden Age Mysteries, where America's forgotten secrets refuse to stay buried. I'm your storyteller, and tonight we continue our Small Town Secrets series with a tale from Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a steel town nestled in the hills 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, where the smoke from the mills mixed with morning fog to create shadows perfect for hiding the truth. In October of 1961, John F. Kennedy was president. The Berlin Wall was fresh concrete and barbed wire, and America was caught between the prosperity of the post-war boom and the growing tensions of the Cold War. But in Millbrook, population 4,200, the biggest concerns were still the Friday night football games, the Sunday sermon, and whether the Steelers would finally have a decent season. Millbrook had been built on steel and sweat. Founded in 1887 when the Pennsylvania Steel Company decided the rolling hills and proximity to coal mines made it perfect for a new plant. By 1961, it was home to 3 generations of steelworkers, most of them Italian, Polish, and Irish immigrants who'd come seeking the American dream and found it in the glow of blast furnaces and the weight of honest paychecks. It was the kind of town where your reputation mattered more than your bank account, where a man's word was his bond, and where secrets, when they existed, were buried deep beneath layers of Catholic guilt and Protestant work ethic, which made Frank Castellano's barbershop the perfect place for both. Frank had opened Castellano's barbershop on Main Street in 1929, just months before the stock market crash that would define the next decade. While other businesses failed and men stood in breadlines, Frank's shop remained busy because even in the worst of times, men needed haircuts, and more importantly, they needed someone to listen to their troubles. By 1961, Frank was 54 years old, unmarried, and had built a reputation as the most trusted man in Millbrook. Judges and janitors sat in his chair. Mill supervisors and union leaders trusted him with their necks. Priests and politicians confided in him during their monthly trim. For 32 years, Frank Castellano had been the keeper of Millbrook's secrets, the man who knew which marriages were happy, which businesses were failing, and which pillars of the community had clay feet. What nobody knew was that Frank had been writing it all down.
You know, as I research these stories from small-town America, I'm always struck by how universal these human dramas really are. The need for trust, the weight of secrets, the bonds that hold communities together. These are the same whether you're in 1960s Pennsylvania or anywhere else in the world today. I'm curious about our listeners. Drop a comment below and let me know what country and city you're tuning in from. Are the small towns where you live similar to these American communities? Do you have that one person everyone trusts with their secrets? I love hearing how these universal stories resonate across different cultures and continents, so please share your thoughts below.
Now, back to our story. It was Monday morning, October 23, 1961, when Margaret O'Brien arrived at 7:30 a.m. to clean Frank's barbershop, just as she had every Monday for the past 8 years. Margaret was a widow in her 50s who took pride in keeping the shop spotless, sweeping the hair clippings, polishing the mirrors, and organizing Frank's tools with military precision. But when Margaret inserted her key into the front door that morning, she found it already unlocked. Strange, because Frank was obsessively careful about security. She pushed the door open and immediately noticed something wrong. The familiar smell of bay rum and talcum powder was overpowered by something metallic and disturbing. "Frank?" she called out, stepping carefully around the customer chairs in the waiting area. "Frank, you're here early today." There was no answer. And then she saw him. Frank Castellano was slumped in his own barber chair, his head tilted back at an unnatural angle, his throat cut so precisely it looked like he'd been preparing to shave himself. His white barber's jacket was soaked crimson, and his right hand still held his favorite straight razor, a 7-inch blade he'd inherited from his father. Margaret's scream could be heard 3 blocks away. Within minutes, Sheriff Tom Bradley was racing down Main Street, followed by Dr. William Hayes, the town's physician and coroner. Sheriff Bradley was a 43-year-old former Marine who'd served in Korea and returned to Millbrook to raise his family in peace. He dealt with bar fights, domestic disputes, and the occasional theft, but nothing had prepared him for what he found in Frank's barbershop that October morning. At first glance, it looked like suicide, Sheriff Bradley would later write in his report. Frank was alone in his shop, doors locked from inside, with his own razor in his hand. But something about the scene didn't sit right with me. Dr. Hayes conducted his preliminary examination while Sheriff Bradley studied the shop. The first inconsistency was the angle of the cut, too precise and too steady for a man taking his own life. The second was Frank's grip on the razor. His fingers were positioned wrong, like someone had placed the weapon in his hand after death. But it was what Sheriff Bradley found hidden behind the false back of Frank's supply cabinet that transformed a possible suicide into something far more sinister.
Inside Frank's hidden compartment were 17 leather-bound journals dating back to 1929, along with a small tape recorder, dozens of cassette tapes, and over 200 photographs. Sheriff Bradley realized he'd stumbled onto 32 years of documented secrets. Every confession, admission, and private moment that had occurred in that barber chair. Frank had been methodical in his record-keeping. Each journal entry was dated and coded with initials. Each photograph was labeled and filed. Each tape was numbered and cataloged. It was the most comprehensive collection of blackmail material Sheriff Bradley had ever seen. The first journal entry, dated September 15, 1929, was written in Frank's careful handwriting. "Today I realized that men tell their barber things they won't tell their priest, their wife, or their God. If knowledge is power, then I may be the most powerful man in Millbrook." As Sheriff Bradley read through the journals, a picture emerged of systematic information gathering. Frank hadn't just been listening to gossip. He'd been actively encouraging confessions, asking leading questions, and creating an atmosphere where men felt compelled to unburden themselves. The photographs were even more damaging. Frank had apparently been sneaking out at night to document the private lives of his customers. City Councilman James Morrison meeting with known gamblers, Bank President Robert Henley accepting envelopes full of cash, even Father Patrick McDonnell engaged in activities that would shock his Catholic congregation. But it was the tape recordings that provided Sheriff Bradley with his first real lead. The newest tape, dated just 3 days before Frank's death, contained a conversation that would change everything.
"You can't do this to me, Frank." The voice was distorted by the old recording equipment, but Sheriff Bradley recognized it immediately. It belonged to Mayor Vincent Romano, one of the most respected men in Millbrook. Frank's voice came through clearly. 30 years, Vinny. 30 years I've kept your secret about what really happened to that union organizer in 31. 30 years I've watched you build your career on his grave. But now I need something from you. Mayor Romano's voice cracked with desperation. That was different times, Frank. Different world. We were all younger, stupider. What you're asking, it would destroy everything I've built. And what you did destroyed everything he was building, Frank replied coldly. His wife never remarried. His kids grew up thinking their father abandoned them. Also, you could eliminate competition for that city council seat. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Frank methodically outlining what he knew and what he wanted in return. Specific city contracts for businesses he had investments in, favorable zoning decisions, and a monthly payment of $500. This is blackmail, Frank, Mayor Romano said finally. This is business, Vinny. Same business you've been in for 30 years, keeping secrets. The only difference is, now you're paying for the service. The tape ended abruptly, but Sheriff Bradley had heard enough. Frank Castellano hadn't just been collecting secrets, he'd been turning them into a profit center. And Mayor Romano wasn't his only client. A deeper examination of the hidden compartment revealed a detailed ledger showing monthly payments from 12 different people, ranging from $50 to $800 per month. Frank had been running a sophisticated blackmail operation for over a decade, generating more income than many legitimate businesses in town. But which of his victims had finally decided that killing Frank was cheaper than paying him?
Sheriff Bradley's investigation revealed that Frank's blackmail operation was far more extensive than initially apparent. Beyond the regular monthly payments, Frank had been collecting consultation fees for information about business competitors, political rivals, and romantic interests. The first person Sheriff Bradley questioned was Mayor Romano, who broke down completely when confronted with the tape recording. "I was 26 years old," Romano confessed, tears streaming down his face. "That union organizer, Tommy McKenna, he was going to expose some irregularities in the city contracts. My father-in-law's construction company was involved. If it came out, it would have ruined not just me, but my wife's entire family." According to Romano, what had started as a simple intimidation had escalated when McKenna fought back. "We only meant to scare him, maybe rough him up a little. But he had a gun, and when he pulled it, Tommy, he fell and hit his head on a steel beam. We panicked and made it look like he'd left town." Frank was there that night, Romano continued. "He wasn't supposed to be, but he'd been following us, taking pictures. He had evidence that could have sent us all to prison." Sheriff Bradley pressed for details about the night Frank died. Romano insisted he'd been at home with his wife playing cards with neighbors, an alibi that checked out completely. But Romano revealed something crucial. Frank had gotten greedier lately. He wasn't just asking for money anymore. He wanted favors, wanted to control city policy. I think he was planning something big, something that would have given him power over everyone.
The investigation led Sheriff Bradley to examine Frank's other regular clients. Each story revealed another layer of the barbershop's dark secrets. Robert Henley, the bank president, admitted to taking bribes from developers in exchange for favorable loan terms. Frank had photographed the cash exchanges and had been collecting $300 monthly for his silence. "Frank knew I needed the money," Henley explained. "My son's medical bills from polio treatment were crushing us. When those developers offered to help, I thought it was temporary, but Frank made it permanent. Father Patrick MacDonald's secret was more personal but equally devastating. Frank had discovered that the beloved priest had been siphoning money from the church collection to support a gambling addiction that had started during seminary. I kept telling myself I would win it back, Father MacDonald confessed. Just one good night at the tables and I could replace everything I'd taken. But Frank had pictures of me at Romano's illegal card games in the back room of his restaurant. Each of Frank's victims had motive to want him dead, but each also had solid alibis for the night of the murder. Sheriff Bradley was dealing with a pool of suspects who all had reasons to kill, but apparently none had the opportunity. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Margaret O'Brien, the cleaning lady who discovered Frank's body. 3 days after the murder, she approached Sheriff Bradley with information she'd been too shocked to share initially. "Sheriff, I need to tell you something about that Monday morning," Margaret began, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I found Frank, he wasn't alone." Sheriff Bradley leaned forward. "What do you mean, Margaret?" "There was someone else in the shop. I heard footsteps upstairs in Frank's apartment, but I was so scared after seeing the body that I ran out before checking." Frank's apartment above the barbershop had been searched perfunctorily, but Sheriff Bradley had assumed the killer had escaped through the front door. The revelation that someone might have still been in the building changed everything. A more thorough search of the apartment revealed signs that someone had been living there recently, but not Frank. There were women's clothes in the closet, cosmetics on the bathroom counter, and a stack of letters hidden under the mattress. The letters revealed Frank's most carefully guarded secret. He'd been involved in a relationship with Maria Torino, the young widow who worked as a seamstress 2 blocks away. But Maria wasn't just his lover. She was his business partner in the blackmail operation. Maria Torino was 28 years old, a war widow whose husband had died in Italy in 1943. She'd moved to Millbrook in 1955 to start fresh, opening a small tailoring shop that catered to the town's working-class families. What nobody knew was that Maria had been Frank's eyes and ears throughout the community. As a seamstress, she visited homes regularly, often working while families talked freely around her, assuming she was too busy with her needle and thread to pay attention. Maria was brilliant at it, Sheriff Bradley would later observe. She was practically invisible, just the quiet widow lady fixing clothes. People said things in front of her they would never say in front of Frank. The letters revealed that Maria and Frank had been planning to leave Millbrook together, taking their accumulated blackmail evidence to sell to a tabloid journalist in Pittsburgh. Their final score would have been the exposure of every secret they'd collected over the years. But their plan had a fatal flaw. Maria had been keeping secrets of her own. Sheriff Bradley found Maria Torino 3 days later in a boarding house in Youngstown, Ohio. When confronted with the evidence, she confessed immediately, as if she'd been waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions. "Frank thought he was so smart," Maria said during her interrogation. "He thought he understood people's secrets, but he never understood mine." Maria revealed that she hadn't come to Millbrook to escape her past. She'd come to find the man who had murdered her husband. Not in Italy, but right there in Pennsylvania. "My husband didn't die in the war," she explained. "He was killed in 1943, right here in Millbrook, by someone who wanted to steal his identity and avoid the draft. Frank had been blackmailing that man for 18 years. The man was Thomas Bradley, Sheriff Bradley's own father. "Your father killed mine and took his place in the army," Maria told the stunned sheriff. "He used my husband's papers to enlist, then deserted and came back to Millbrook with a new identity. Frank knew the whole story and had been bleeding him dry until he died in 1959. Maria had spent 6 years getting close to Frank, learning his operation and planning her revenge. But when she discovered that Thomas Bradley was already dead, her need for justice had transformed into something darker. "If I couldn't punish your father, I decided to punish the man who profited from his crime for 18 years, she said. "Frank got rich off my husband's murder. He deserved to die."
On the night of October 22, 1961, Maria had gone to Frank's shop as planned, supposedly to finalize their escape plans. Instead, she'd confronted him with what she'd discovered about his most profitable blackmail victim. Frank tried to justify it, Maria recalled. He said he was just collecting payment for services rendered, that he'd earned his money by keeping dangerous secrets. But my husband's blood money was still blood money. The struggle had been brief. Frank, caught completely off guard by Maria's accusation, had grabbed for his razor instinctively. In the fight that followed, Maria had turned the blade against him, cutting his throat with the precision she'd learned from years of handling sharp tailoring shears. "I didn't mean for it to happen the way it did," she insisted. "I wanted him to confess, to admit what he'd done. But when he reached for that razor, I couldn't let him hurt me too." After Frank died, Maria had staged the scene to look like suicide, then hidden upstairs in his apartment until she was sure the coast was clear. Her plan had been to disappear entirely, but Margaret's early arrival had trapped her in the building longer than expected. Maria Torino was charged with second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. She served 9 years and was released in 1971, eventually moving to California, where she opened another tailoring shop and lived quietly until her death in 1998. The revelation of Frank's blackmail operation sent shockwaves through Millbrook. Mayor Romano resigned in disgrace, but was not prosecuted due to the age of his crime and lack of additional evidence. Bank President Robert Henley was forced out, but also avoided criminal charges. Father McDonnell entered a treatment program and eventually returned to active ministry in another diocese. Sheriff Bradley struggled with the revelation about his father, but eventually concluded that the sins of one generation shouldn't define the next. He served as sheriff for another 20 years, becoming known for his integrity and his understanding that everyone carries secrets that could destroy them. The barbershop remained empty for 2 years before being converted into a small restaurant. The ornate barber chair was donated to the local historical society, where it sits today, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones we trust others to keep. Dr. Hayes established counseling services for the town, recognizing that secrets kept in darkness often grow into something destructive. Frank's tragedy, he observed, was that he mistook information for power, never understanding that real power comes from helping people heal, not from collecting their wounds. The case became a cautionary tale about the price of secrets and the danger of trust misplaced. It showed how a small-town institution, the neighborhood barbershop, could become the epicenter of manipulation and exploitation when compassion was replaced by calculation. Perhaps most tragically, the Millbrook confession chair case revealed how the cycle of violence and revenge can span decades, turning victims into perpetrators and justice into vengeance. Maria's quest to honor her husband's memory had ultimately cost 2 more lives, Frank's and her own future. And so concludes another chapter in our Small Town Secrets series, where trusted institutions can hide the darkest truths, and where the people we depend on for comfort might be the very ones exploiting our vulnerabilities. The Millbrook confession chair case of 1961 reminds us that secrets shared in confidence can become weapons in the wrong hands, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in town is the one everyone trusts the most. Join us next time as we explore another forgotten corner of small-town America, where the past refuses to stay buried and trust can be the most dangerous currency of all. Until then, remember that the stories we tell in confidence should lift us up, not be used to tear us down. And that true power lies not in what we know about others, but in how we choose to help them heal.